Welcome to Hype Hazard, your source for exposing the tech behind the hype. Today's technology landscape is all too full of buzz and cash, and yes, it's also full of trash.
And in our show, we'll cut through the flash and the FOMO, helping you navigate the hazardous data conditions ahead and sidestep all too much PR speak in order to uncover where the real opportunities lie.
So, if you're a discerning executive, a pragmatic innovator, or just a citizen adopter like us all, yes, this podcast is for you. Now, before we jump into today's tech du jour, and we have quite a good one today, let's introduce ourselves. I'm Jessica Grootman.
And I'm Jamie Szymanski, and we are technology analysts and founders of Kaleido Insights. We have spent our careers researching new disruptive technologies and how they impact consumers, businesses, and society at large.
We've seen a lot along the way. Thousands of companies, dozens of industries, and there are many gems and also a lot of BS. But, for better or for worse, these things have changed life and work as we know it. Now, in our podcast, Hype Hazard, we'll share our experience with you, dear listener, and help you understand new hyped up technologies for what they really are.
And if you haven't caught on yet, here's a spoiler alert. They're typically trash. And with that, let us dive in. Today, we're talking about facial recognition technology, and more specifically, Clearview AI. Dun, dun, dun.
Buckle your seatbelts, or maybe put on your goggles.
Cue the ominous sound effects. So Clearview AI, it's a facial recognition search engine. So a lot of you may be familiar with something like reverse Google image search, where you can drag an image that you have into Google image search, and it will come up with a lot of other images that look like it in order to find where that image came from. So it's kind of like that, except it's on steroids.
For your face.
For your face. So a user can upload an image of someone's face, and Clearview AI searches 3 billion plus images from the open internet and social media in order to find images that are most similar to what you've uploaded. So the most similar results appear first in the search results, and this happens in a millisecond if you look at a demo of it. And as you scroll down, it starts to pick out other images that fit a lot of what this facial image looks like, but maybe it's not 100% there. And they've trained the AI algorithm for Clearview AI with a neural network on millions of examples of faces, making different poses, somewhat covered, different lighting, different angles, facial hair, even age regression. It's a highly accurate program. Clearview AI uses such a large data set, much larger than existing facial recognition programs out there in software, and it's better than the human eye. It is very rare that they have any false positives.
The CEO actually said a 99.6% accuracy rate.
Really? I knew it was high.
The mouth of the CEO.
That's really an excellent accuracy rate. Who uses Clearview AI? You might be wondering, well, it's complicated. They're marketed toward law enforcement primarily, using Clearview AI facial recognition to apprehend suspects, people that they find in photos that they think committed a crime, or through other fraud-related applications. For example, a bank's fraud department might use Clearview AI. The company says recently, I think it was in February of 2021, that they have about 3,100 different law enforcement agencies, as well as the Army, Air Force, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. All of these different areas of the government have signed deals with Clearview. Now, Clearview AI is a software application that you can access online or via mobile app. It's about $2,000 a license per year, in case you're interested.
Sold as a SaaS product.
It is a SaaS product. And although they're marketed toward law enforcement, there are other uses that we're seeing rolled out. And I think that some of the use cases for Clearview AI are what have really been in the press recently and some of the documents that have been uncovered. And that's a reason for a lot of the hype around Clearview AI. What do you think, Jess?
Why would a biometric identification system cause so much hype? Well, initially, the kind of spark to the hype here actually came in January of 2020, which is when Kashmir Hill, a reporter with the New York Times, published a huge expose called The Secretive Company That Might End Privacy as We Know It. Certainly a provocative title. But in this expose, she really pulled back the kimono on who Clearview AI is and the cloaks of mystery around the company. It's very difficult to actually get in touch with them. They had a fake address on their website, not to mention just the power of a tool that is 7 times the size of the FBI's former image recognition, facial recognition database, 7 times the size. Over 3 billion images, as you said. So we had this expose, which really pulled back the cover. And by the way, the New York Times has run a privacy project during all of 2019. So this was very much in line with their coverage. They built a ton of awareness around privacy generally. And this was sort of a capstone piece on that broader topic area and huge debate that we're having. But in many ways, this sparked an international debate over facial recognition. In response to this article last year, over 40 technology and civil rights organizations sent a letter to the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board in 4 different congressional committees outlining, what they were concerned about. And following this expose, needless to say, there was a ton of eyeballs on the company, but there was also a data leak. They sort of had a bit of their own medicine here in that another company actually scraped Clearview's, not their data, not that repository of 3 billion faces, but their customer list. And this blew off the cover of the claim that they were only supporting law enforcement agencies, because not only, police departments, but all the 3-letter agencies in our government, as well as clients in retail, in banking, in gaming, in law, legal, as well as in 27 different countries around the world. So not just a United States or even North America-based clientele. So this, again, sort of prompted its own set of questions, its own set of scrutiny on this tiny little startup, only a few employees, albeit valued at $100 million. And currently they have about 17 million in funding. Now, this was last year. So why the hype now? Well, a couple of reasons. For one thing, with the January 6th storming of the US Capitol, this once again recalibrated how we think about surveillance technology. Needless to say, it was found that Clearview's facial recognition software was used to run numerous images posted by the FBI for suspects to generate leads of people who were engaged in the riot and sedition.
Right. Did you see that the CEO said that the use of Clearview went up 26% the day after the Capitol mob attack?
And, these are the kinds of things, Jamie, that in the tech space we can't foresee, right? And all of our debates of where will this go? What are the unintended consequences? Very few could have seen this coming. And so, the other piece that has really brought this back into the hype sphere as of this year is Clearview is squarely amidst an onslaught of different lawsuits. 11 different lawsuits in Illinois tied to their Biometric Information Privacy Act. 10 class action lawsuits, complaints filed against Clearview in the United States, lawsuits from the ACLU, from the Attorney General of several different states. So you would think, and actually I think it was Kashmir Hill, the reporter from New York Times, who also just published a piece last week on this, who said it seemed entirely possible that Clearview AI would be sued, legislated, or shamed out of existence. Of course, they haven't. But in many ways, we're sort of at this precipice for this company as they face so many lawsuits as such a small firm.
Absolutely. I think this is a perfect example of no press is bad press, which is why it's so difficult to split, us talking about Clearview AI into a hype and a hazard. Because I think that anything that they're doing now that puts them at the forefront of all these privacy conversations is the hazard. I mean, that is the main hazard of this tool, is that it infringes on people's rights in a variety of ways regarding their data. I would also add to the hype recently around Clearview AI would be just last month in February of 2021. It was published a patent that they applied for in, I think, August of 2020 that was pretty broad-reaching. It included things like they wanted to use their technology to search people by their mental health status, their housing status, drug use, home address, email, and employer's website. They suggested it would be used for a dating app.
What could go wrong?
Right, what could go wrong there? I mean, it's not broad at all. However, if you read further into the patent application, they also want to use it for authenticating bank account holders, which I could see it being used for that in fraud departments, as I mentioned earlier, as well as maybe creating a very closed network for retail or real estate clients to share headshots of high-risk individuals. And finally, perhaps the most nefarious use, in my mind, just outright awful use that they had listed in part of the application was to allow users to spot individuals with a mental issue or handicap, verbatim in the application. So that was just released to last month. So I think that's also been part of the hype in that first they backtracked on saying that they did not serve anyone in the private sector. They were only for, law enforcement and government agencies. Well, then, the lid was blown on that, and they actually did have private clients, including, to your point, retailers like Macy's that had performed 6,000 searches in Clearview. Not just a couple here and there, which was one of their initial defenses was that, a lot of times administrators don't know that people have downloaded our free trial. So they've only run a couple searches. Not quite the case when you're looking into the actual usage and analytics for some of their private clients. So I think that it's important to recognize that Clearview AI has been at the center of a lot of press simply because they are not transparent themselves. There's a lot of mystery and intrigue as well in terms of the founding of Clearview and who claims to be a founder and who claims they are not a founder. They have plenty of alt-right heavy conservative ties. And, they operated really out of the public view for a good 2 years, which made it really feel like an expose when the New York Times reported on it.
Indeed. And, we should double down on this a little bit in terms of, anything political is sort of a hot potato. This is part of the hype conversation. Some companies, especially larger companies, sort of claim neutrality. Others claim, strong partisan ties. Here we have a case that is not really claiming anything in one way or another. But when you look into the actual history, indeed, there are several affiliations with neo-Nazis, with racists, with QAnon, with Breitbart writers, including actually sort of thinking about facial recognition as a tool to enable an ethno-state. This is not fake. This is not to condemn the technology or the company. It is only to be aware of what are the intentions and the values that are going into building algorithms. Case in point, Chuck Johnson, who is, as he would say, one of the founders and has some actual legal documents to show this, but this is refuted by Ton Tat, who's the CEO of the company. Chuck Johnson stated on Facebook, "I'm working on building algorithms to identify all illegal immigrants for the deportation squads." So in many ways, regardless of how you feel on
he's proud of it. Like she's sharing it in that way, that how it's going to be used. Right.
A case of clearly signaling intention. And again, regardless of where you are politically, this is in many ways what is driving the intention behind these tools. These tools are not neutral. No technology is fundamentally neutral. This is sort of a new way of thinking and phrasing it. Companies love to say we're just a platform, we're just a neutral tool. Like fire, it can be used for good or ill. But when we're talking about developing algorithms based on colossal data sets of highly personalized, literally individual data, there are values that go into place in how these algorithms are selected. And as you said, what are the use cases that are being designed for? That patent is another perfect example. So many contentious issues rolled up into this company that are not so easy to really peel back.
Absolutely. And, we talked a little bit about, a lot of it, about privacy and, the control and consent of data, and where Clearview AI prominently sits is right smack dab in the middle of violating many privacy laws. Unfortunately, there are no federal laws in the United States regulating facial recognition technology. So although they might be receiving flack and lawsuits at the state level, you mentioned in the state of Illinois, their Biometric Information Privacy Act. It's kind of been a thorn in the side of Clearview AI as well as other big tech giants over the years, because the law basically states that private entities must have individual consent to use biometrics or they incur fines. And so as you mentioned, Jess, they have 11 lawsuits in Illinois. Looking globally, Canada has declared Clearview AI illegal. German regulators have ordered Clearview to delete a citizen's data because it violates GDPR. However, you look at these cases in Europe and specifically the case in Germany, and it really only applied to that one individual's record, not to Europe as a whole. GDPR also has a right to be forgotten in it that Clearview AI does not comply with. I watched an interview with their CEO where he blatantly said, after being grilled a little bit by the CNN reporter, that the Clearview AI cache, CACHE, not cache, cha-ching, stays until an individual asks it is removed, unlike typically cache pages on Google that automatically expire when a site is updated or it reaches a certain time threshold.
And do you know how a user asks, am I in this database or not?
No.
You have to submit a photo. You're good.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I had read that they were working on a different mode in order to ask to be removed from,
Hope so.
their platform, a sort of opt-out method, but there have been no details released on that as well. I think we also need to think about, the biggest issue here obviously is data privacy and use, but let's talk a little bit more about consent. How about that, Jess? And consent and privacy in terms of what you post about yourself online versus what someone else posts of you publicly. So Clearview AI right now can scour any image on what they call the public open web. So let's say my Instagram account is private and Jess, yours is public. And if you post a photo of me, even if you don't tell me that you tagged me, even if I don't approve it, but it is out there, Clearview AI then can use that photo. Right now, this is sort of an inadvertent consent that they're talking about. Whereas I could not go and request it be removed because it's not my photo that I posted. It's your photo. So I think that it's very hard to think of an instance where consent is really being reached on the whole for everyone who's involved in these photographs, and that it can be proven. Because right now, it can't be proven that I even gave verbal consent to have my image posted online.
And, this gets to some of the core issues and also opportunities for dealing with privacy. So, for example, how do we think about the use cases or the intentionality behind how our data is used, whether it's us posting, as in, sure, I'm going to post something to Instagram, but my intention and my understanding of that is that it lives on Instagram, not that it's going to end up in a police database somewhere down the line. I have no, transparency into when, how, or where. I have no recourse, right? So what is the initial intention or the initial use case in our, reasonable understanding for that posting? This is one piece. And similarly, a lot of these legislations in privacy are thinking about, should we just have blanket legislation about all data use at all time for individuals' personal data? Or do we think about it through a use case lens? Are there specific laws for social media, specific laws for the automotive space, specific laws for, biometric data used in a wellness context? We don't have an answer to that today, but this gets to, what is the sort of supply chain, if you like, of an image that I post and how it floats down the river and all of the different use cases on top of that. Of course, most consumers have no concept for this at all. They post a photo on social media and don't think about it thereafter. They certainly don't think that it could be used in a sort of dragnet database to implicate them or their friends or anyone else who happens to be in the background.
I think that you and I, typically we can see the hazard from a mile away in a tool like this, as can a lot of consumers out there who are even mildly concerned with data privacy. I do think, though, that it's important for listeners out there who haven't heard of Clearview AI to understand how it can be best used in law enforcement capacities, especially when it comes to child abuse and human trafficking. That was one of their first big use cases that they published that has since been used to save many children from child abuse. Is they can identify an abuser, and through using their tool, they can actually figure out who that person is much faster, or they maybe wouldn't have been able to do it at all beforehand using the tool. So I think that it's good to think about, in terms of where we need to head and what needs to change, is that some things are good uses of it. I don't want to necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater in terms of talking about facial recognition as a whole. However, without any regulations and safeguards or the ability for us as consumers to actually be stewards of our own data and have control, well, that's when it gets hairy.
Absolutely. I mean, we must balance the discussion of risks with opportunities and transformative use cases for good. I mean, certainly, to take criminal acts as a counterpoint to the downsides of this technology, indeed, this is an extremely powerful and useful tool for law enforcement, for finding criminals who got away of all different stripes, of all different types of, malicious acts. This is extremely useful. And to their credit, Clearview points to examples in, financial fraud, in sex trafficking, in all sorts of different areas. On a whole different side, thinking about identity generally, in our industrialized rich country in the West, we don't think that often about, folks who are unbanked or undocumented or, political upheaval.
That have zero digital footprint in a lot of ways.
And zero access to authentication documents. And so through this lens, something like a face becomes an irrefutable form of identity, becomes a way to, authenticate access to services or entitlements. We've seen some really interesting examples in other countries by the UN, for example, looking at facial recognition or biometric authentication in one form or another as a way of preserving identity, preserving the undocumented or the unbanked in cases of political upheaval or currency, unraveling or whatever the case may be. And simultaneously, it's important to think about different political structures in this conversation. So again, as a negative use case, identifying political dissidents in countries, for example, where homosexuality is criminalized. This is a negative use of the tool, potentially. So, it goes both ways. These tools can be used for good and for ill.
Right. I mean, even when you think of the U.S., when it was used after the Capitol riot, which used in a lot of cases to identify those individuals, which was great. But if you think of on the flip side, it also could be a deterrent then to anybody who might want to go to any sort of a peaceful protest, even in the future, if they feel as though their level of anonymity that they come to expect is not going to be regarded as such. I like that you bring up the point about those who are undocumented, that it serves as a way to document people, because I think that it's a good use I could see for travel verification. I mean, that's one emerging use case that I see already, the TSA using it in, multiple airports throughout the U.S. for their, customs and border protection, in terms of, using facial recognition to match a scan of the face today versus, what's on the passport or the visa. Speeds up travel. There's convenience abound. I think that will be the biggest thing to balance, though, when looking at the opportunities in the future is what do we trade for the convenience and some of the perks of facial recognition? And that is a story that we have been telling and adding to for the last decade, Jess. What are the data trade-offs? What are we willing to sell our data for? When we are the product, what sort of level of privacy do we demand? And can we actually ensure that is enacted on our behalf? And that's a hard question to answer without any real regulation. And when we're leaning on tech companies and startups to lead the way.
And startup CEOs to make these incredibly profound decisions.
Make these decisions on our behalf, absolutely.
I mean, in many ways, the pandemic is an interesting, again, a twist of fate for emerging technologies, among many other areas, because it places this tension and this trade-off not only in a new light, but one of, at the same time, a sort of classic tension, which is to say public health versus privacy and civil liberty. We see, these questions of what do we prioritize and when, we weigh them differently given the different circumstances. And so now we are, amidst, hopefully towards the end of this health crisis, but it is a time in which expanding domestic surveillance in ways that could be difficult to unwind. By the way, Clearview was interested in helping out with contact tracing. No word on whether or not that actually happened. But
I didn't see that.
Indeed, leaving the answers to these crucial questions to individual companies, to individual executives, is not a place that we want to be as a democracy. And one of the most important things I think needs to change around the data protection question and generally with facial recognition is a balance to surveillance. How, if we're going to have so much top-down surveillance and we are being asked to accept this, what are the balance mechanisms, whether they are regulatory frameworks or whether they are increasing surveillance from the bottom up? How are we able to see our own recourse? What is the company doing? How are they building their algorithms? What is, good training data? We don't have a sense for how to balance that out.
Yeah, I think you hit that on the head. A lot of consumers don't have the faintest idea in terms of what data is being used for AI algorithms, or even what that means, right? I mean, I think that if you talk to a lot of people, they don't even recognize that Clearview AI is being used in these capacities, or that they're thinking about how facial recognition could be used at the brand level in other ways. I mean, I've been following facial recognition technologies for a while, and you see them on the private sector scale, even something like, Disney, that they said that they're going to be rolling out facial recognition at Magic Kingdom that captures an image of the guest's face and then uses it as a unique number for admission to different parts of the park. So you can only imagine what would happen when those private data sets, combine with something like Clearview AI. Yes, there's money-making potential for sure. There's personalized engagement potential, but at what cost? So with that, I think that it is probably time for ratings, Jess.
It's that time.
In each episode, listeners, we rate the technology company at hand on a 4-point scale. It's very scientific, to be clear. The first is trash. I mean, it's garbage. You can understand what trash means with little explanation. The second is flash. These would be a flash in the pan, something that's really hot now, but pretty fleeting once early adopters move on. The third is cash. This would be a moneymaker with scalable potential, but ultimately nothing super innovative, so it might be an add-on to an existing service or something that's just really easily scaled. And finally, a splash. That's something that's fundamentally innovative and full of transformative potential to fix a real problem. So Jess, given everything we've talked about with Clearview AI, this is a hard one.
It was a hard one.
What do you rate Clearview AI?
It's a hard one. And I could make the argument for probably all 4 of these scientific
agreed.
ratings. However, I'm going to call this trash. And here's why. The technology is not trash. In fact, it's predominantly, it's a leader in the space by almost any metric. What I would call trashy is the culture and the regard for individuals' rights and for clarity around such a powerful technology. There are more than a dozen examples of obfuscation of just sketchy behavior around this company, of things that were said and promised but have not come to pass or have been shown or exposed to be, well, false. Making comments like our system is utterly free of bias and racism is just not reflective of how the technology works, and they surely know better as AI engineers. So trashy, culture, trashy, regard for human rights, for human consent and agency. This is as important as technological innovation in our world.
Interesting that you say the company culture trash, because I would agree with that 100%. I would say that the company itself and what they put forth in terms of their ethic and ethos is trash. However, as an overall technology category, facial recognition, and what Clearview AI has achieved in such a short period of time, I would say splash.
All right.
I think that sometimes splash, just by structure of our scientific ratings, it sounds positive, but not necessarily. I think a splash simply means it is fundamentally innovative. And what they're doing is an innovative use case. And it is full of that transformative potential that we talk about to fix problems. Although regulation has not caught up, and it's sort of the Wild West for Clearview AI in terms of just, basically make mistakes and ask for forgiveness later. That doesn't mean that there's not great potential in using their algorithms for good. We didn't talk about some of the other potential use cases that could come down the road, maybe using augmented reality for real-time identification. You think about what that could do for law enforcement agencies, if that is the use case that they continue to pursue. I think that, being someone who has researched customer experience or CX for nearly a decade, of course, there are myriad opportunities there as well to use facial recognition technology and Clearview AI in order to create a more seamless customer experience. So I think it's balancing a little bit, as an analyst here, what is the greater societal impact before regulation catches up versus what is some of the other, lifestyle impacts that we could see improve from something like Clearview AI. So I fully agree that as it sits now, it couldn't be sketchier. I think that, they basically just wait to be caught in things and wait for new documents to be unveiled, and then they have some sort of excuse. So I think it's trashy in that capacity. But when we look at the technology and, again, what they've achieved in a short period of time and what the potential is in terms of future use cases, I would say splash.
Definitely. Truly transformative.
So thank you so much for being with us today, listeners, and join us for the next Hype Hazard, where we continue to expose the tech behind the hype. And in the meantime, please check out all of our content at kaleidoinsights.com. We'd also like to thank Randall Ward for our sound editing and Adam Roskowitz, who composed our music and sound effects. Until next time, cheers.
Bye-bye.